From the American Experience Storybook, Clara Barton, Part 2. Living is doing, she said. Even while we say there is nothing we can do, we stumble over the opportunities for service that we are passing by in our tear-blinded self-pity. The oversensitive girl had learned her lesson well. Life offered moment by moment too many chances for action for a single worker to turn aside to bemoan his particular condition. The retired teacher became a confidential secretary to the office of the Commissioner of Patents. Great confusion existed in the patent office at that time because some clerks had betrayed the secrets of certain inventions. Miss Barton was the first woman to be employed in a government department, and while ably handling the critical situation that called for all her energies and resourcefulness, she had to cope not only with the scarcely veiled enmity of those fellow workers who were guilty or jealous, but also the open antagonism of the rank and file of the clerks who were indignant because a woman had been placed in a position of responsibility and influence. She endured covert slander and deliberate disrespect, letting her character and the quality of her work speak for themselves. They spoke so eloquently that when a change in political control caused her removal, she was before long recalled to straighten out the tangle that had ensued. At the outbreak of the Civil War, Miss Barton was therefore at the very storm center. The early days of the conflict found her binding up the wounds of the Massachusetts boys who had been attacked by a mob while passing through Baltimore and who, for a time, were quartered in the capital. Some of these recruits were boys from Miss Barton's own town who had been her pupils, and all were dear to her because they were offering their lives for the Union. We find her with other volunteer nurses caring for the injured, feeding groups who gathered about her in the Senate chambers, and from the desk of the President of the Senate, reading them the home news from the Worcester papers. Meeting the needs as they presented themselves at that time of general panic and distress, she had sent to the Worcester Spy appeals for money and supplies. Others took up the work, and soon Miss Barton had to secure space in a large warehouse to hold the provisions that poured in. Not for many days, however, did she remain a steward of supplies. When she met the transports which brought the wounded into the city, her whole nature revolted at the sight of the untold suffering and countless deaths which were resulting from delay in caring for the injured. Her flaming ardor, rare executive ability, and her tireless persistency won for her the confidence of those in command, and though it was against all traditions, to say nothing of ironclad Army regulations, she obtained permission to go with her stores of food, bandages, and medicines to the firing line, where relief might be given on the battlefield at the time of direst need. The girl who had been a bundle of fears had grown into the woman who braved every danger and any suffering to carry help to her fellow countrymen. People who spoke of her rare initiative and practical judgment had little comprehension of the absolute simplicity and directness of her methods. She managed the sulky, rebellious drivers of her army wagons, who had little respect for orders that placed a woman in control, in the same way that she had managed children in school. Without relaxing her firmness, she spoke to them courteously and called them to share the warm dinner she had prepared and spread out in appetizing fashion. When, after clearing away the dishes, she was sitting alone by the fire, the men returned in an awkward, self-conscious group. "We didn't come to get warm," said their spokesman as she kindly moved to make room for them at the flames. "We came to tell you we are ashamed. The truth is, we didn't want to come. We know there is fighting ahead, and we've seen enough of that for men who don't carry muskets, only whips. And then, we've never seen a train under charge of a woman before. We couldn't understand it. We've been mean and contrary all day, and you've treated us as if we've been the general and his staff, and given us the best meals we've had in years. We want to ask your forgiveness, and we shan't trouble you again." She found that a comfortable bed had been arranged for her in her ambulance. A lantern was hanging from the roof, and when next morning she emerged from her shelter, a steaming breakfast awaited her, and a devoted corps of assistants stood ready for orders. I'd cook my last meal for my drivers, said Clara Barton. These men remained with me 6 months through frost and snow and march and camp and battle. They nursed the sick, dressed the wounded, soothed the dying, and buried the dead. And if possible, they grew kinder and gentler every day. An incident that occurred at Antietam is typical of her quiet efficiency. According to her directions, the wounded were being fed with bread and crackers moistened in wine when one of her assistants came to report that the entire supply was exhausted. While many helpless ones lay on the field unfed, Miss Barton's quick eye had noted that the boxes from which the wine was taken had fine Indian meal as packing. 6 large kettles were at once unearthed from the farmhouse in which they had taken quarters, and soon her men were carrying buckets of hot gruel for miles over the fields, where lay hundreds of wounded and dying. Suddenly, in the midst of her labors, Miss Barton came upon the surgeon in charge, sitting alone, gazing at a small piece of tallow candle which flickered uncertainly in the middle of the table. "Tired, doctor?" she asked sympathetically. "Tired, indeed," he replied bitterly. "Tired of such heartless neglect and carelessness. What am I to do for my thousands of wounded men with night here, and that inch of candle, all the light I have or can get?" Miss Barton took him by the arm and led him to the door, where he could see near the barn scores of lanterns gleaming like stars. "What is that?" he asked amazedly. "The barn is lighted," she replied, "and the house will be directly." "Where did you get them?" he gasped. "Brought them with me." "How many have you?" "All you want, 4 boxes." The surgeon looked at her for a moment as if he were waking from a dream, and then, as if it were the only answer he could make, fell to work. And so it was invariably that she won her complete command of people as she did of situations by always proving herself equal to the emergency of the moment. Though, as she said in explaining the tardiness of a letter, my hands complain a little of unaccustomed hardships. She never complained of any ill, nor allowed any danger or difficulty to interrupt her work. "What are my puny ailments besides the agony of our poor shattered boys lying helpless on the field?" she said. And so, while doctors and officers wondered at her unlimited capacity for prompt and effective action, the men who had felt her sympathetic touch and effectual aid loved and revered her as the angel of the battlefield. When the war was ended and the survivors of the great armies were marched homeward, her heart was touched by the distress in many homes where sons and fathers and brothers were among those listed as missing. In all, there were 80,000 men of whom no definite report could be given to their friends. She was assisting President Lincoln in answering the hundreds of heartbroken letters imploring news which poured in from all over the land when his tragic death left her alone with the task. Then, as no funds were available to finance a thorough investigation of every sort of record of states, hospitals, prisons, and battlefields, she maintained out of her own means a bureau to prosecute the search. 4 years were spent in the great labor, during which time Miss Barton made many public addresses, the proceeds of which were devoted to the cause. One evening in the winter of 1868, while in the midst of a lecture, her voice suddenly left her. This was the beginning of a complete nervous collapse. The hardships and prolonged strain had, in spite of her robust constitution and iron will, told at last on the endurance of that loyal worker. When able to travel, she went to Geneva, Switzerland, in the hope of winning back her health and strength. Soon after her arrival, she was visited by the President and members of the International Committee for the Relief of the Wounded in War, who came to learn why the United States had refused to sign the Treaty of Geneva, providing for the relief of sick and wounded soldiers. Of all the civilized nations, one great republic alone must unaccountably hold aloof. Miss Barton at once set herself to learn all she could about the ideals and methods of the International Red Cross, and during the Franco-Prussian War had abundant opportunity to see and experience its practical working on the battlefield. At the outbreak of the war in 1870, she was urged to go as a leader, taking the same part she had borne in the Civil War. "I had not strength to trust for that," said Clara Barton, and declined with thanks, promising to follow in my own time and way. I did follow within a week. As I journeyed on, she continued, I saw the work of these Red Cross societies in the field accomplishing in 4 months under their systematic organization what we failed to accomplish in 4 years without it. No mistakes, no needless suffering, no waste, no confusion, but order, plenty, cleanliness, and comfort wherever the little flag made its way. A whole continent marshaled under the banner of the Red Cross. As I saw all this and joined and worked in it, you will not wonder that I said to myself, if I live to return to my country, I will try to make my people understand the Red Cross and that treaty. Months of service in caring for the wounded and the helpless victims of siege and famine were followed by a period of nervous exhaustion from which she but slowly crept back to her former hold on health. At last, she was able to return to America to devote herself to bringing her country into line with the Red Cross movement. She found the traditionary prejudice against entangling alliances with other powers, together with a singular failure to comprehend the vital importance of the matter, militated against the great cause. Why should we make provision for the wounded, it was said. We shall never have another war. We have learned our lesson. It came to Miss Barton then that the work of the Red Cross should be extended to disasters, such as fires, floods, earthquakes, and epidemics. Great public calamities which require, like war, prompt and well-organized help. Years of devoted missionary work with preoccupied officials and a heedless, short-sighted public at length bore fruit. After the Geneva Treaty received the signature of President Arthur on March 1st, 1882, it was promptly ratified by the Senate, and the American National Red Cross came into being, with Clara Barton as its first president. Through her influence, too, the International Congress of Bern adopted the American Amendment, which dealt with the extension of the Red Cross to relief measures in great calamities occurring in times of peace. The story of her life from this time on is one of the story of the work of the Red Cross during the stress of such disasters as the Mississippi River floods, the Texas famine in 1885, the Charleston earthquake in 1886, the Johnstown flood in 1899, the Russian famine in 1892, and the Spanish-American War. The prompt, efficient methods followed in the relief of the flood sufferers along the Mississippi in 1884 may serve to illustrate the sane, constructive character of her work. Supply centers were established, and a steamer chartered to ply back and forth, carrying help and hope to the distracted human creatures who stood wringing their hands on a frozen, fireless shore, with every coal pit filled with water. For 3 weeks, she patrolled the river, distributing food, clothing, and fuel, caring for the sick, and in order to establish a once normal conditions of life, providing the people with many thousands of dollars worth of building materials, seed, and farm implements, thus making it possible for them to help themselves and in work find a cure for their benumbing distress. Our Lady of the Red Cross lived past her 90th birthday, but her real life is measured by deeds, not days. It was truly a long one, rich in the joy of service. She abundantly proved the truth of the words, we gain insofar as we give. If we would find our life, we must be willing to lose it. Thanks so much for listening. Please reach down, click like, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now. I love you guys.